members of the public and additional agencies that have joined us today. Today is a regular scheduled ATC meeting on April 6th, beginning at 10:03 a.m. Lori, would you like to take the roll call?
Yes, thank you. Bolinas Fire District. City of Larkspur. Kentfield Fire. Novato Fire District.
Here.
Stinson Beach Fire.
Here.
Town of Ross.
Present.
City of Mill Valley. County of Marin Fire.
Present.
Marinwood CSD.
Present.
Sleepy Hollow Fire. Town of Corte Madera.
Town of Corte Madera is present.
Thank you. Town of San Anselmo. City of San Rafael. Inverness Fire. Muir Beach CSD. Southern Marin Fire. Town of Fairfax. Okay, so we do not have a quorum by the people that, is there anybody I missed?
Yeah, Lori, I just added Quinn, and then the
Quinn's there.
415-378-1459 phone number is Sleepy Hollow.
Sleepy Hollow, okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's still, we need another person.
Did San Anselmo?
Is there anybody I missed that on the roll call? Please raise your hand or respond.
I'm counting 8 members. Is that what you're counting?
Yes. And we need 9, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quinn showed up, so. And then let me take members at large, and then we'll see if somebody else shows
Okay.
up.
Okay.
California State Parks.
Ray Hardcastle is here. Hello.
Thank you. National Park Service. Marin County Parks.
Yep, Jim Chapek here.
Pacific Gas and Electric. Marin Water.
Carl Sanders here.
Thank you. And then ESP Bill is here. Is there anyone else, let's see, that did not get in the roll call that is a member? We are looking for a quorum.
Did Rob Bastion
Who's he with? And I'll tell you.
with
Yeah.
Ross Valley? And I'm not sure.
Lynn, I cover the town of Ross.
Okay,
Yeah.
not San Anselmo?
No, Sean Condrey is sending someone. He's on vacation this week.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We still have 8. At this time, we cannot have a meeting. We would have to recess the meeting unless you want to wait a few more minutes.
We could continue, but take no action. We can just discuss.
Okay.
Is that not correct, Lori?
Can't have a meeting if you don't have a quorum. You can't discuss anything without a quorum. Usually you adjourn it to another date.
Let me, I'm going to reach out to Fred Hilliard.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Let's see who else is not here.
Yeah, Kent Field's on vacation or at a class.
Stephen Peters, is he associated with any?
Is that?
Stephen Peters is on the attendees.
No, he's
He's
fire safe Marin staff.
Okay. Why my hand was raised, I have no idea. Town of Fairfax, they're not, yeah. Everybody must be on vacation, huh? Because usually everyone's here, almost
It's
everyone.
spring break, so I think many people are
Oh,
vacationing.
our kids had it a couple weeks ago. Let's see, is there anybody else here?
Mark, any luck getting hold of Fred?
I'm texting with him right now, trying to get him on. So I'm going back and forth with him a little bit.
Okay.
He's at an FDAC conference. So I'm trying to get him to.
Oh, he's probably with Larry. That's right. Okay.
Hey, Rob, do you happen to have Sean Condry's number?
Yeah, I know. I spoke with him yesterday. He is on vacation and not in the area.
Okay,
He is definitely not available.
gotcha. Thanks for checking.
If there was some way that we could have one of our representatives represent our other jurisdictions that we cover, I do have Derek Shaw sitting next to me, but I don't know if that's possible.
Not yet, but I do see Chief Hilliard coming in. So we now
Okay.
have
Oh, great.
Fred. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Unfortunately, the conference room that I'm in doesn't have Wi-Fi, so I'll be on as long as I can.
Thank you very much, Fred.
Thank you.
Okay, well, then we can call the meeting.
Okay.
So let it, the record reflect that the city of Mill Valley, Fred Hilliard is present, and that makes a quorum.
Great. Okay. Moving forward, do we have any adjustments to the agenda? I guess not. Okay. Moving forward, open time for public expression. Do we have anybody from the public that would like to speak?
At this time, if anybody would like to speak to the committee on any items not on the agenda, please raise your hand and you'll be noticed. None at this time, Lynn, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, the planning and program managers report. Anne.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to keep this very, very short because we do have a lot to talk about today. So just a few items. As you know, we are recruiting. We only have 2 permanent staff members right now, but we are hiring. We're in the middle of our management analyst recruitment and should be interviewing candidates in the very near future. So we're really excited about that. We're also recruiting for the vegetation management. That would be managing the chipper program. And I believe that recruitment closes today. Is that right, Mark?
Sounds right.
6th, yeah. And then we're also hoping to recruit for a grant specialist to help us distribute funds for residents to do their home hardening in defensible space. We'll be going back to the board with a modified job description and should be able to start recruiting for that later on in April. Let's see, as an FYI, we are finishing up some environmental compliance for 2 more projects that should be on the board agenda this month in April. And that includes one for San Rafael and one for Southern Marin Fire. So keep an eye out for those. And then, you know, just as an FYI, we've been really working hard to find pathways through the regulatory landscape in the coastal zone. And we met with Coastal Commission staff yesterday to talk about options and think through kind of that strategy. So if anyone has questions about coastal zone issues, please feel free to give me a shout. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Anne. I will open this up to the public for any comments.
Is there anyone wishing to speak on the planning program manager's report? Please raise your hand. I see none. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lori. Thank you, Anne. Moving on to the consent calendar, number 6. This is the opportunity for public comment on consent agenda items that will occur prior to the committee's discussion of this consent agenda. The committee may approve the entire consent agenda with one action. In the alternative, items on the consent agenda may be removed by any committee member or staff member for separate discussion and vote. So we have minutes of the March 16th, 2022 Advisory Technical Committee meeting. Could I get a vote from the committee?
Motion and a first.
Motion.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second,
I'm sorry, who made the second?
it's Fred Hilliard,
Fred.
Southern Marin,
Thank you.
Mill Valley.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Quinn and Fred.
I will take
Okay,
roll.
number 7 is discussion.
Let me take roll in.
Okay, thank you.
Roll call. Thank you. Or the vote call. Nevada Fire District?
Here.
Yes. Okay. Stinson Beach Fire?
Yes.
Town of Ross?
Yes.
City of Mill Valley?
Aye.
County of Marin Fire?
Yes.
Marinwood CSD? Marinwood CSD? Sleepy Hollow Fire? Sleepy Hollow? Quarter Madera?
Yes.
Thank you. City of San Rafael?
Yes.
Okay, I missed Marinwood CSD and Sleepy Hollow Fire.
Marin Woods, yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Passes by unanimous vote of those present. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Number 7 is discussion items, and there is none. So we will move on to the action items. Action item A is project proposal submitted for the 22-23 work plan. Anne or Mark, do you take this or?
Yeah, I think Mark and I are going to share this item. I'll take the beginning here and then Mark's going to help with the budget.
Perfect, thank you.
So can everyone see my screen? You see a slide? Yes, okay, great. So I'll talk a little bit about the process, kind of review where we've been and where we're going. Review the overall proposal form and the prompts that were a part of that. Then we'll talk about budget and Mark will cover that. We'll talk a little bit more about what happens after the work plan is finalized. So we're thinking through the process from, you know, brainstorming your project proposal all the way through environmental compliance. We'll talk about one particular detail that I just want to cover related to the proposals and how we're going to be tracking those. And then we'll start diving into the proposals that are in draft form, but part of the current draft of the work plan. So in terms of process, we started working on a portal in late 2021. We started meeting as committees in December actually. And so February and March, we spent those 2 months uploading projects, proposals to the web portal, modifying the web portal, thinking through Brown Act considerations. And the operations committee, a subcommittee, an ad hoc subcommittee started meeting to think through the beginnings of a budget. Now that we're in early April, we're now discussing proposals publicly for the next work plan, and we'll be continuing to finalize those proposals to fill in gaps, because a lot of those proposals are very drafty still, have some questions that need to be answered, some details that need to be entered. We'll also be working with the operations committee to refine them, to kind of think through priorities, to think through budget, because there are always, more ideas than we have funding for. So we'll need to be thinking about all of those questions and how to prioritize and how to budget for all of those ideas. And then the operations committee is really going to be taking that lead in April and May, and then moving it on to the board of directors, who will approve that work plan in May. And I believe that's May 19th. So what I'd like to do now is just walk you through, for the sake of folks who are listening in, who are not yet part of the, hold on, let me grab the right view here, who have not been using the work plan portal. I wanted to share, what the kind of ideal is, what the prompts are. So I'm going to share my screen again. Not sure if you see what I'm seeing. Hold on one moment. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing what is the PDF of the work plan portal. And this was distributed as kind of a primer so that you could enter information into this and then copy and paste it into the portal if you'd like. So I'm just going to run through it very quickly as a review for folks listening in. So there's a basic info tab in the web portal that allows users to enter, who they are, who's entering the information, who the potential project partners are. So different agencies, different land management agencies, etc. There's a prompt here: if the proposal overlaps or is directly adjacent to public lands, has the lead agency coordinated with the appropriate land management agencies, and please describe that effort. So we're really trying to promote collaboration. There's a logic to the web portal. So if you're entering equipment, then there's a prompt to describe what equipment. If you're entering a staffing proposal, then you describe that. If it's a project, then you're going to describe your project. Then you want to talk about what your benefits are. So in addition to fire risk reduction, are there additional benefits that could be discussed and potentially be useful for future funding opportunities, etc.? So wildlife habitat, reducing invasive plant cover, etc. These are kind of co-benefits. Dates, approximate, when would you like to start your project? How does this mesh with the existing CWPP? So, for example, does it address some of the projects that are listed in the CWPP under Appendix B? And then, does it mesh with other large plans like the general plan, local plans, HOA, etc.? How would your project enhance fire adapted communities? And then we want to talk about where this project is located in relation to kind of fire severity zones, etc. So it asks for acreages or some sort of description of the project in terms of fire risk. And then also what kind of communities at risk would benefit. So both within the JPA and outside kind of neighboring communities who would benefit from this project. And then assuming your project is a vegetation management project, talk about the geographic scope, talk about the objective, because you've already chosen a goal under basic info. So what objective are you addressing? And then if there are other objectives that are relevant, you can describe that here. And then describe how your project reduces the risks associated with wildfire. And then a note here, do you think your project potentially overlaps the coastal zone? That's good for us to know for planning. Identify habitable structures or other community assets that would benefit. And then is your project a planning project, an initial treatment, so out in the field implementing, or maintenance of a project that's already been considered? And then additional details related to that. So equipment, methods, what you plan on doing with your biomass, a little bit on greenhouse gas emissions, off-road travel, staging, things like that. So this is all really useful for us to determine what kind of environmental compliance might be needed in the future. So for example, are you planning on constructing a temporary road to do this project? 99.9% of the time, the answer is no, but we wanted to ask that question. How many workers per day, approximately? And a lot of this at this stage is really preliminary, and we can scope it out later in the future. So as an FYI, we wanted to let people know that we'll be tracking metrics. So maybe acres treated, miles of road treated, etc. And get an idea for what kind of vegetation you'd like to have removed, maybe even the amount, if you can estimate it. And then additional information, kind of baseline data or measures you'd like to provide to help us track the project. And then, would the project result in physical disturbance? And so we didn't ask, do you need CWP done? We wanted to ask the question regarding physical disturbance, so we could use that and determine what kind of environmental compliance pathways most appropriate. There's another tab for projects that are more about detection, notification, evacuation planning, etc. So describe your project, goals, objectives, target populations. What's your project timeline for this? Any particular deliverables that you'd like to discuss? I'm going to keep scrolling here. Grants, additionally, your objectives, secondary objectives. What type of grant are you, would you like to do? How are you going to manage grants? Public outreach and education, additional details, just let us know what kind of project you're looking at, who are your target audiences, etc. So we're really trying to dig into information that would help us understand the project, help us understand how to track this project in the future, and help us understand the environmental compliance pathways. Defensible space and home hardening has its own tab. I won't go into too much detail. And then, are there existing environmental compliance documents out there that we should know about, or that you already know about that you can share? Any existing biological resources, data, etc. Any other partners that would be part of the environmental review or have already conducted environmental review. So I wanted to provide that as an overview of the type of data we're collecting to build these proposals for the work plan. The work plan currently is still in progress, and we'll be fleshing out some of those details as we go. And that's what the month of April is really going to be about. So next, I'm going to invite Mark to talk a little bit more about this in terms of budgeting. But I'm wondering, do we want to, I see Belle's hand up. Do we want to start questions now or do we want to wait a little bit?
I don't have very much. I just wanted to. Well, if you, is there going to be a time when we can raise questions later?
Yeah, Belle, we'll have time for comments and questions.
Okay,
after.
fine. I'll wait. I'll
Okay.
keep my hand down. Yeah.
Thanks,
Perfect.
Belle.
Thank you, Belle.
Yeah.
All right. I had to get my share screen going and then remember to unmute myself before I started talking. And give me a thumbs up if you guys can see our budget screen. Thank you, Ann and Lynn. So in theory, the MWPA budget is supposed to be simple. 60% of our budget goes to core, 20% of our budget goes to D-space, and 20% of our budget goes to local mitigation projects. D-space and local are all straight pass-throughs. So the theory goes awry that this is a simple budget when you realize that we have 17 member agencies that are subdivided into 5 different zones. And then we have county fire that has a footprint in each of the 5 different zones. And then we have JPA-wide projects. And then we have projects that are separated by zone. So first, I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of how that supposedly simple but complex budget comes together by using this spreadsheet and talk about how everything interacts with JPA wide core projects versus regional core projects, and where we can manipulate some of the numbers based on budget funding decisions. And it's not a linear process as we go through this spreadsheet. So where I'm going to ask you to look first is right down here at the bottom of projected revenue. That's actually our starting point. We put what we anticipate our starting revenue is to be. We anticipate revenue for 22-23 to be $20,506,188. That's based on this year's revenue plus the recommended CPI adjustment that we are recommending to the board to make. So a 3% increase to the property tax. So after we get this $20 million, $20.5 million, the next step is to look at this second column, and that's the percentages that each member agency represents as far as their totals within the joint powers agreement. You multiply that 20 million by this percentage for the city of Larkspur, and this is how we project that there would be 1 million and change of revenue created in Larkspur. And then the same is true as we go down the rest of this list. And then you take 60% of that, that's projected revenue, core revenue. Unfortunately, we can't just add up all of the, and I'll use Central Marin as an example. You can't just add up these totals and get the core that's assigned to the Central Marin area because of county fire. County fire has pockets of jurisdiction. So some of county fire's revenue actually gets added into what would be considered core. And in order to create these percentages here that you have in this area percent, we actually had to go into the tables, the parcel number tables, and identify what parcel numbers are connected to what JPA core. We're talking 90,000 parcels that we had to go through this table and subdivide into 5 geographical regions to create this number. So at the end of each fiscal year, the company that handles our tax levy for us, NBS is their name, they tell me based on the spreadsheet that we created, what the percent of revenue that was created in each of the zones. That is expressed here. This core minus admin is that we carve off the 10% for the MWPA administrative costs right at the beginning. So you have this is what the core funding minus the admin costs is for each of the 5 zones. And here is the total. So our total core budget is $11,073,341.52. Now that we know what the starting number is, we have to scroll down and look at the JPA-wide core projects. And this year we have far more JPA-wide core projects than we did last year. Just as a comparison, you see at the bottom of this, you see the total is 6.492 million, right? Last year we had 3.3 million in JPA-wide core projects. I'm going to go down this list project by project and kind of give a little bit of the why and what flexibility between operations and advisory technical that we could have in making recommendations for what these budget numbers should be. The coastal zone environmental compliance process, that is in order to create what's called a public works plan that works along with the Coastal Act and the coastal zone, coastal commission staff, as well as the Marin County Community Development Agency staff. There are additional steps that we have to take for each and every project that lands in the coastal zone. And we have coastal zone in Southern Marin and in West Marin. So this impacts two of our core areas. And we've actually been on hold for quite a few projects because of that step. Fortunately, San Mateo County and Santa Cruz County have already gone through the PWP process that we're going to be able to borrow and implement our own PWP. A layman's way of describing this would be almost like a programmatic EIR, environmental impact report. So we would be able to leverage what we put into the PWP to work with CDA staff to get our projects approved in a streamlined fashion. And talking to, I'm going to share what Ann shared with me this morning, meeting with Coastal Commission staff yesterday. They absolutely positively reaffirmed the putting the PWP together is the best route to go. And this 100,000 is an estimate, so we're working on that now. Public education. Last year's public education was just under $600,000. You see it's 988,000 this year, so close to a 50% increase. And that is based upon the direction that was given by the operations committee. They advocated for an increased outreach in public education. In fact, the quote is, we need to start preaching outside of the choir, meaning we need to change the way we're communicating, the methods and the modes that we're communicating in to reach more people. We have an audience that listens to us very well, and they've been doing a lot of work in that audience, or that audience has been doing a lot of work. We need to find a way to get outside of that audience. And part of it is changing the way in which we communicate rather than all be virtual, all be digital. We're looking at the Adapt to Wildfire campaign is the main impetus in this section. And that is having actually banners on buses, banners on the roadways, signs, print media, so on and so forth. So that's why you see that increase. And that was based really on that direction that was given from the operations committee was we want to see more public education. Tying into that is the public education metrics. We want to be able to identify whether or not we are actually succeeding with our public education, or are we wasting our money, or do we need to change how we're providing our public education? This was somewhat of a high priority for the board, but I think this is one of the numbers that could be flexible. So direct assistance and staff to support that. Direct assistance is following the model that some of our agencies have been using to great effect, and that is for those with low income. Rather than having a reimbursement grant process, which is very difficult for people who are already have low income issues, to be able for them to pay for work on their property and then to be reimbursed is not feasible for them. So the idea behind direct assistance is that we would actually put crews, whether it be the Fire Foundry crews, the Ecology Corps crews, AmeriCorps crews, and target specific items, and I'll look to you. We were targeting juniper, cypress, and zone 0 areas. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it was within 30 feet of homes, within 10 feet of driveways, bamboo, Italian cypress, juniper, those sorts of things. And some home hardening in the form of gutter guards and vent replacements.
Excellent. Thank you for filling that in for me. So this is funding based on how many properties that we would hope to be able to reach, and staff to be able to support that, because direct assistance, especially listening and learning from Quinn's experience, Lynn's experience, is staff intensive. The total for that was 860,000. I do think that this is one of our numbers that we can move up and down. How much direct assistance do we really want to embark upon? And also understand that we'll have unspent revenue from our grant program from 21-22 that potentially could be moved over to 22-23. Fire detection camera coordination. This is having artificial intelligence applied to our cameras for fire detection and notifications to our command center. We penciled in $60,000 because that could also potentially fund the connection of our cameras to our evacuation maps. However, PG&E, we are 90+% confident that PG&E will fund the artificial intelligence for all of the cameras that we already have. I think this 60,000 number is a number that we definitely could decrease, even to the point of nearly like $1,000 to $2,000 just to cover some incidental costs. Defensible space inspection app, and actually it would just be the subscription and not the staffing. So there's two ways that we could pay for our fireside subscription. We can carve it out of the core, or we can pull it out of each individual agency's DSpace allocation. We felt that since many agencies were expressing that they're maxing out their DSpace category and actually putting in for core projects to augment the DSpace, that it made more sense to pay for the subscription out of the core. Just to give you an idea of what it is, it's for each member agency. If we were to pay for it out of their DSpace funding, it's 3.4% of their DSpace funding is what equates to providing that subscription. So this could be completely negotiable. This could be, well, let's take it out of the core and put it in the individual DSpace, or keep it in the core. To us, it's just a matter of balance with what budget center that you pull it out of. Grant programs and staff to support. Again, I think this $745,000 is a number that we can bring down if we needed to. And that is, the grant programs would be for DSpace for all residents, up to $1,000 reimbursement. And Ann, help me out. What was the threshold? It was matching up to $5,000 for home hardening, correct?
I believe that's right, but I'd have to go back and double check.
I see Lynn nodding her head. Thank you, Lynn. And so again, this was based on how many properties we had hoped to be able to impact. However, this number can be brought down as well. Plus, we do have unspent revenue from the last fiscal year that we will be able to roll over into this. Zone Haven subscription, that is a number we actually and put 80,000 in where it's actually closer to 75,000, but just anticipating potential increases in fees, but we definitely could bring that down to 75,000. But that is not a category that we can go any below 75,000. That is a must-have. That's subscription for a contract that we have ongoing. Here's the big one, and that's the environmental compliance for core projects. And that's a big price tag, and it's something that has impacted what each core total is, and that's $1 million set aside for environmental compliance. But let me give it a little bit of the why and describe why we are recommending this path rather than building in 10% compliance for each of the individual projects. First of all, some of the projects came in well below 10%, but then quite a few projects came in way above 10%. And so this was impacting what was going to be left remaining to implement a project. And also it was an extra couple of steps that we were having to go through in order to get approval for the projects and delaying actual implementation. So if we were going to exceed that 10%, that meant going back to the board saying, hey, we've exceeded this 10%. We need to adjust that in order to get the compliance completed before we can actually bring the project to you for submission. So it was building in at least a month delay of when we can implement projects. That's benefit number one. Benefit number two is that when you guys are doing your project planning, you will know what you have now for implementing that project. You don't have to estimate the 10%. You don't have this moving scale. You have a number that you can look at. And then I think one of the final pieces of this is the fact that that previous 10% did not include biological surveys. It did not include archaeological reviews, nesting bird surveys. And so those costs were going to come out of your implementation costs, whereas now it'll come out of this bucket, and then you won't have to worry about it again in your implementation side. The 1 million is based on the going with that same formula of 10% that we had applied before. But if you think about it, it's actually a little bit less than 10% because we have 11 million. So it's more like 9% that we're putting aside for environmental costs. And if we come in under budget with those environmental costs, then we would reapply the remaining funds back into the core so that agencies can increase the implementation funding. Operational costs is a category that we had last year at $500,000. We increased it to $600,000. This is covering our rent. And we do anticipate relocating and having an increase in our rent. This is for contingencies if we have any budget overruns within a particular project, whether it's a JPA-wide project or it's an individual zone project. It's for our website development, JPA portal development, some of our communications portions that aren't covered with the public education, training for both MWPA staff, and actually training, we've used this for training opportunities for some of our member agency staff as well. And research and development. The next one is the Chipper program and staff support. And if I recall right, this is the same number that we had for last year, was 1.25 million. It's been a very successful program, and I like it's really nice to see that that number didn't go up from one year to the next. 43,000.
Mark, if I can just add, it went up slightly. The contractor costs are higher this year, so it went up a little bit.
Okay, so well, that's right. It was 1.1 last year, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Regional disaster preparedness coordinator, that is our 1/3 share. This is a countywide coordinator, and MWPA is providing 1/3 of the share for that position. The additional fire and law agencies are covering the additional costs because the scope of work is beyond fully being wildfire related. So we are paying for the wildfire related portion of that position. We have year 2 of our contract that we have with the Marin Masters Gardeners and UC Cooperative Extension. So that 126,000 is really not a negotiable item. That's what we are obligated to provide, but it's just for this next year. Risk reduction tracking. That is one of the things that is brand new. It's something that we don't think anyone has done, and it is actually a fairly high priority for the board. And this is, we have our CWPP parcel level risk assessment. And in order to know that we are tracking in the right direction, we need to see if we are changing the risk that is present out there. And currently we are on path to update CWPP every 5 years. That really isn't timely enough for us to know that we are making a difference with the work that we are doing. So this risk reduction tracking will be bringing in multiple components. It'll be bringing in the data from our defensible space evaluations. We are also looking to partner with a company called Willow Labs that has looked at all the damage assessment data for the fires over the last 5 years in California and identifying exactly what is destroying homes. Taking that reverse analysis of those fires and applying it to our inspection platform is giving us a risk assessment of the home aspect, the home ignition, as well as the DSpace portion of it. And then we're also combining the work that we have done in evacuation route clearings and any projects, whether it's prescribed herbivory, our shaded fuel break in the Ross Valley, and on a frequent basis, being able to take that and show, and we're looking at kind of like a speedometer type scale, that for each community, we can have a speedometer scale that's backed by science of the risk is here. And as we get work done, we can see that speedometer start getting to lower risk. And then the last one is we carved out $350,000 for the evacuation ingress egress risk assessment. We have about 8.8 or 880,000 set aside from previous fiscal years for this. The project's at 1.25 million. So this would be to cover that difference. However, we are exploring grant opportunities for that. If we get the grant that we are looking for, then we would put that 350 back into the overall core budget. And I want to, and speaking of grants, is that talking to the Coastal Commission, they think that there are some excellent opportunities through the Coastal Conservancy to get grant dollars for the environmental compliance. And again, if we can get those grant dollars, then that would fold right back into the core projects above. So that brings us to this core minus region. And at our last ATC meeting, I anticipated that these numbers would be 2/3 of what the numbers were that you guys had last year. And I have some numbers here for your comparison, and I was off by 3.6%. It's actually these numbers are 63% of what you had available to spend in your individual core areas last year. Central Marin had 1.6 million. West Marin had 434,000. Nevada was 1.7 million. San Rafael was 2.1 million. And Southern Marin was 1.3 million. And again, if we decrease these numbers in these regional projects, it will have the percentile change of these numbers here increase in here. And the last piece I was going to bring up is the grant revenue column. For instance, we have applied for a grant for the Central Marin or the Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break. So we would insert that grant revenue right here to show that what is totally available after that grant revenue was inserted. If we had a grant that was spread across the entire jurisdiction, then we would apportion those numbers based on these numbers here. I know that's a lot, and I'm going to stop my screen share so you guys can all be present and ask any questions, because I'm sure there are questions, comments, concerns, especially with let's put it right on the table. We doubled the number of the value of the JPA-wide projects. And I'm sure that there's concern with that, and totally open in ways of adjusting those numbers. And just I want to recognize the work that was done by two ad hoc subcommittees, one for grants and one for the JPA-wide projects. It was really those ad hocs that drove those numbers. But it's easy to think about numbers when you're focused on that one little project. And now is our opportunity that we're out of those silos and we see the connections and how they all drive those numbers. We can have different discussions.
We do have other items or other talking points and slides within this item, but I think now might be, if it's okay procedurally, to a good time to take a pause and kind of discuss this piece, since it's a big piece. Does that sound all right?
Okay, we can go ahead and open it up for questions to the committee's members, and then after that, open up to the public for comments. Is that correct, Lori?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So it looks like Quinn, you have a question.
Yeah, I apologize for being off camera. It doesn't like me having the agenda and my camera on. Too big of a file, I guess. But I really appreciate the work. I know, Mark, to your initial point, like it's not a simple budget at all, and I want to fully recognize that. I think for me, I have a lot of like pretty specific questions, and I don't know what the best way to handle that is, but I think for me it's, and I know you've given us a heads up, and that's a very impressive estimate that you made. But even kind of working through that, I think it's just really difficult to swallow that much of a reduction. And so I think looking at where we can potentially change some. So I guess one of the first questions I have, because I think it might answer more, is while I totally understand the value of doing the coastal zone compliance, I think if we're creating a standard that says any project that touches 2 zones is a JPA-wide project, then I think there's other projects we actually need to be adding to the JPA-wide project list. Specifically, I know San Rafael and Nevada are looking at a project right on our border, and we're working on one with Central Marin around the Ridgewood project. So I think I'm a little concerned about that particular one being JPA-wide. I think I'd rather see it split between the zones personally. And if not, then I think from an equity standpoint, we need to, if that's the standard we're sticking with, then let's stick with that standard, but that's obviously going to have more implications on JPA-wide budget. So that's my first question. Like I said, I have a list, but it's probably easier for me to pause in between them and let folks provide any additional feedback or response that they want.
Thanks, Quinn.
I mean, there is a way. I mean, I looked at this number already, and it's between the funding between Southern Marin and West Marin. If you're going to look at the percentages, it's 75% Southern Marin, 25% West Marin when it comes to that balance of funding. And perhaps we could make that, like you said, Quinn, a joint project between the two and apportion the funding in that way. That's just an option to share.
And maybe some of it comes out of the broad JPA compliance, environmental compliance budget. I don't know why that particular project becomes JPA wide when other ones don't. And that's, if we can't articulate that to the public and to our taxpayers, then I think we need to rethink that structure maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, that's something we can explore, Quinn.
Okay, thank you. Just to clarify too, when you were referencing county fire, you meant like unincorporated county, right? Which obviously is county fire, but in terms of like budgeting, that's how you were referencing that point, right?
Exactly.
Okay, perfect.
Not necessarily response, but
yeah,
yes,
Okay.
CSA 19, stuff like
yeah.
that.
On the pub ed, I thought the metrics is actually a really important one. I was glad to see that in there. I worry that we might be doing those in reverse, where we might want to do the metrics first before we double the pub ed budget. And, you know, it's not to say I think there is a lot of value in increasing the pub ed budget in certain ways. And certainly I think the adaptifier, and I'm totally on board with the, like, we got to start preaching to the choir and get broader. I just worry about increasing the budget that much without having those metrics in place. So it might be more of a phased or a building block approach, because I think really analyzing that and then looking at like really what are we changing to reach those folks, and then there's obviously a lot of costs with doing something like the Adapt campaign and really like a full-fledged marketing campaign. But I think diving into that budget to me is maybe a little bit worthwhile. Again, making sure we're hitting those pieces right.
And just for clarification, it's not a doubling of it, it's a 50% increase.
Okay. Still a big one. And again, I'm just looking at like how much our core budgets are shrinking. So that's my thought on that. I totally support DSI being a JPA. I think I'm on board with using it at this point. And if it's going to be the tool that supports the grant, that's a great use of the JPA wide, I think, from my perspective. I think, and we mentioned this, I think, last meeting with the big environmental compliance bucket. I think it can make a ton of sense. But I don't think we've gotten a clear answer on then how we're going to handle some of these projects that have gotten put in the work plan as like planning projects that really are environmental costs. Because are we kind of duplicating that potential expense? Or should something that's, you know, like how do we differentiate between what just falls into the general environmental compliance budget versus like what needs to be its own project?
And that's something that Ann and I have been discussing, and we think that that could be something that could be apportioned back so that agencies, for lack of a better word, aren't penalized for being forward thinking and actually building a project like what Todd did with this Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break, what Lynn and Mike are doing with the even greater Novato Shaded Fuel Break. I had to throw that in there. Sorry, Mike. So yeah, I think there needs to be an acknowledgement that that level of foresight is being built in, and we don't want to quote penalize somebody by having that foresight. So we would build that back into the reload into the core projects or the core individual area core fundings.
And if I could add to that a little bit, you know, that estimate is pretty blind because without knowing what the projects are for the next work plan, you can't really budget for the environmental compliance because it can vary so widely. So what we've started over the weekend and just in the last, you know, 48 hours or so really in earnest is taking a look at all of the projects that are currently proposed, whether or not there's already environmental compliance done, because some of those projects are carryovers from one year to the next. And what kind of environmental compliance are we looking at? So that's part of the reason why we're asking all of these questions as part of the work portal or the online portal is, you know, what kind of environmental compliance costs are we looking at? I mean, are we off by an order of magnitude, or are we kind of pretty much right on? Are we right at the edge? So we need to, you know, on our part of the process, part of what's going on right now this week is looking at all these proposals and trying to group them. Could some of them be all one environmental compliance document? You know, things like that. So looking at the costs and trying to get a better idea for what that is, because that initial estimate is, you know, a blind estimate.
Thanks, Jan. That's really helpful, and that makes total sense to me. And I will take that to mean that I think we're over in the 1 million. If we look at I think the big ones are getting put in as planning projects, and then some things too, like grazing as an example, right? We've already done the compliance on that. We know we're going to hit this point of like repeat. So I'm hopeful that number can hopefully go down in that sense.
Yeah, and we have an initial kind of guess as to what projects we think are holdovers from last time with environmental compliance done. So we're going to be in touch with that list to double check it with all of you guys.
Great. Can you help me better understand? I know you listed the things in the operational budget, but help me better understand the difference between the operational budget and then the 10% that's getting pulled for admin.
So the admin costs are for purely administrative functions, whether it's my salary, almost all of Ann's salary, it'll be all of the management analyst salary, our services and supplies fees with, and then also independent contractors that are focused on administrative type functions. And then to make a difference to that is that rent is an operational cost as opposed to administrative cost. Training, whether it's tuition, per diem, hotels, such and such, those are operational costs. We want to have a contingency in case we do have some project overruns that we can be able to cover that without dipping it into other projects. And then we also want to have to be able to have the ability for research and development of new and emerging technologies.
Okay, I think what might be helpful as I was like kind of listening to you go through this list, there's certain things that are just like hitting categories for me. And I'm in my head, I'm like, I think the public would respond really well to a pie chart that was like admin and operational, like on the ground work, defensible space, like environmental compliance. Like I think there's these buckets, and I don't know if we've really looked at like, you know, I think the public expects a ton of this money to be going into on the ground work. We know the reality is there's a lot of money that has to go into the background of it to make it work, whether that's staffing, environmental compliance, and everything else. But I don't know if I have a clear picture of that, and I don't know if what it is aligned with like the intent. And so that's kind of where when like, you know, because 600 on one hand makes a ton of sense, like rent's expensive, we're in Marin County. And on the other hand, it's like when you start adding those up, it's like that's all money that's going away from So I think maybe just that visual could be really helpful. I could be totally off on that, but I think
It's
having
going to
that-
be further refined in the budget. We're going to break out those categories a little bit better.
And I think that is the chipper program, totally supportive of. It's a win. And like I said before, I think too, as much as I know it's hard to hire and manage staff, but I think in the long run, it's probably more cost effective than contractors on a lot of this stuff. So I think like the opening that's out now makes a ton of sense. And you guys obviously are super important and great. And I think on that piece, I think the other thing that I think hit me is you mentioned the website as an operational cost, but then I know we have website costs under the pub ed budget. And I just want to make sure that like, are we double, like, and I think that's Fire Safe Marine's website versus the MWPA website, which then gets into, you know, the Fire Safe Marine website existed before the MWPA. Is that really an MWPA expense, even if they're the pub ed arm? And that's a complicated situation, but I just want to be cognizant of, again, just how much we're seeing our core budget shrink and making sure that, you know, we're just putting a critical eye and really evaluating that at the end of the day, like these big changes, like a 50% increase in pub ed means there's 1 or 2 less on the ground projects happening. And if we all agree that's the way to go, fully supportive, but we do have to kind of recognize that with the gain on one end, we have some loss on the other. Because we will end up cutting obviously a substantial amount of projects if the final budget is kind of what you showed. So that's my list. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Quinn. Belle,
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, thank you. Well, I just wanted to say a few things. One is that as someone somewhat new to this, how do you define a JPA-wide project? Is there a definition somewhere? I mean, is it when 2 districts combine their work? There must be a definition. And it would help to understand these projects to know more about that. That's one thing. And the second is I have some comments from some of the people that I've talked to in ESP who were looking. It's kind of a feedback on the work plan that we got from you, and I hadn't seen what you presented today. And I think maybe rather than my detailing what we have to say, and I think I'll just send you what these comments are. But one had to do with suggesting that the form that you have include the fire threat rating from the CWPP for the locations for each project, or show the projects as an overlay on figure 26, and that's on map 75. This is pretty detailed, but on page 75 is a map, and that's the culmination of much data and analysis. So the figure pulls together 7 map layers to identify 3 categories of parcel level fire hazard. And it would be helpful if this map was used as the base map for each project map. It will incorporate much information in one map and help the public to understand priorities. So that's a recommendation that we have. We have a few others that are less comprehensive. We had some concerns about the boilerplate language that you provided. And if somebody on the outside is looking at these 1-page condensed statements, it's hard for a stakeholder to understand what's in there, what methods will actually be used. So we wanted some better clarification of that. And suggest that the work plan be more user-friendly if the list of projects were linked to the 1-pagers. So I will just send you in writing some of these suggestions that we had, and I learning about how this budgeting takes place. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Belle.
I'll just add that that I think you and I have a lot of the same thoughts about what future versions of the work plan will look like. For example, we're working with Panorama to create a more sophisticated map of all of the projects that have been entered. We're working on a draft of the work plan that will be more than just this kind of copy and paste job for this initial list of proposals, but it'll be a linked, document with, ADA compliance and a table of contents and all of that. So it'll be a much more user-friendly. And because this is just a very initial list of proposals, a lot of those details haven't been filled in yet, but we will be working with member agencies to fill in those details for those projects. And so that's what the month of April will really be about.
Okay, thank you. Good. Be glad to talk to you about it.
Thanks, Ann. Thanks, Val. Todd? Lando? Do you have a comment?
Thanks, Lynn. I have, first I want to speak to something Bell just asked, and then I have a question for, I think, Mark and Ann, then a litany of comments, many of which were addressed by Quinn, so I'll shorten it way down. Bell, you had asked about overlaying the project perimeters with risk and hazard data that we have maybe from the CWPP.
Yeah.
I just, I would hesitate. I think part of our role as the technical advisory committee is to, provide advice and consider, ideas like that. I would say that from the public's perspective, that would probably paint an inaccurate picture. And I would just quickly lay out this example, in fire suppression, wildfires specifically. The control lines, the places where you attempt to stop a fire are most often not the places where the risk or the hazard is the highest. Those are the last places you want to do that work. So I think we need to be considering as the technical advisory committee the relative efficacy of this work. And that's much more complicated. Just because we have a red pixel on a map in the CWPP doesn't mean that that's the location where we need to do the work to reduce the risk to that location. And so I think that's a pretty complicated, set of topics that we absolutely should be giving advice to as part of this committee. But I don't know that there would be a value in publishing a map that looks like that to the public, because it would probably paint an inaccurate picture. That said, what I really want to address is the budget. So first, for Mark and Ann, can you clarify for me, are we as a committee going to have an opportunity to vote or provide guidance that would then move these projects forward with maybe adjusted budget numbers to the operations and executive committee, or I'm not totally clear on the process here or what our involvement will be in this.
And it really does, per the language of the JPA, the budget really rests with the operations committee. So my suggestion is that the ATC make recommendations for the JPA wide core projects where they think numbers can be adjusted.
Okay, that was basically my understanding, but I think it's critical. Quinn did a really fantastic job. Thank you, Quinn, for addressing this. And again, thank you, Mark and Ann and the whole team at MWPA headquarters for doing all the legwork to build this to this point. It is that this, when we look at the numbers, it's one of these issues. Every one of these proposed programs and budget numbers is fine on its face. These are all important things that we want, but when you add them up, it creates a situation where we really have to consider what we're asking for here. This is a death knell to some major projects. San Rafael, Quinn has alluded to that. The Central Marin, I don't see how we move forward on the projects we've been planning and proposing and really laid a lot of groundwork for if this were to move forward at this level. It's a significant hit. Not that we didn't realize this was coming. We knew we were going to have this discussion, but the numbers, it's substantial, and it really makes an impact on some of the most effective programs that I think the MWPA is going to undertake. So, Quinn covered these things, but I want to, like, the environmental compliance. I think we can't understate the value of the pre-planning work that we've done. The fact that, like, the Central Zone and San Rafael now coordinating with Central Zone has, and Nevada even have undertaken these planning projects. The environmental compliance is part of the core. I really can't say that I support that concept, especially when we see that number and take into account that we are doing individual planning. So I think we, as a technical advisory committee, really need to provide guidance to agencies to simplify their project planning, build future programs and projects that leverage similar scopes of work, locations, leverage maintenance and of existing projects so that we can extend the life of existing project or compliance, minimize the cost of ongoing compliance. We really need to be thinking about this. So, if we continue to dump $1 million into compliance each year, this is not discounting the critical importance of it legally and to protect the environment. But we need to be leveraging this to make sure that we're able to get as much actual work done for the public. And I'm not convinced that sharing this, across the core is the right approach on that, largely because some of the zones, some of the agencies have really started to put some effort into pre-planning and doing what I just suggested. And so I hope that makes some sense. I'm a strong believer that compliance should be based on the individual projects, and we should be doing better planning so that we don't introduce 10 different projects that require individual compliance when the reality is they all have similar scopes of work and similar locations and could have been done, in an overview, something more akin to what we've done in the Central Zone. That said, again, I'm going to use the word again, death knell. This is a really painful hit if this goes through at this level. And it doesn't mean that I don't support individually each and every one of these proposals. But I think we have to think long and hard and probably dial this way back. That's the end of my comment.
Thank you, Todd. Piggybacking off that, as far as today and an action item goes, what are we supposed to do as far as the ATC today regarding this? Because on the agenda, it says make recommendations for operations committee to review proposals and develop a budget.
Yeah, I think that is that's the idea, to move this along to the operations committee for and then continue being engaged to further refine proposals, add details, and then work kind of at the staff level on budgeting and priorities. However, I think we can hold another ATC meeting in late April if we'd like to continue this kind of collaboration. We can also there's another item that we could add to the agenda for that we can discuss in future agenda items. But Mark, since you were part of this process last year, do you have thoughts on how best to proceed?
I think it's, first of all, compiling and sharing the thoughts, questions, concerns that have been expressed so far with the operations committee. And then recommendations from you guys where you think we would be best to identify in the JPA wide core projects numbers that we could decrease in order to increase the core wide or the zone cores, and perhaps even number, an estimated value that you think. And I think our direct assistance and our grant program could be two places where you guys have been much closer to that than we have. And so perhaps you guys say, hey, this is what we think a good threshold for that spot would be, a good target there. And then perhaps we can, based on the feedback that you've been giving, we can refine some of the environmental numbers and change the way the PWP number looks like. So I think that's the type of information that you pass along to operations. Operations has a budget ad hoc subcommittee, and that's where they can really work with you, your recommendations you give today to decrease the JPA wide numbers to increase the zone cores.
Okay.
Mark, could we have like a joint ATC ops meeting? And it could be Brown Act in public, and maybe it's the ops finance subcommittee and maybe one rep from every ATC zone. Just
We
because
can have a full joint meeting, but if you combine ad hoc subcommittees, you can't combine ad hoc subcommittees across the two different committees.
Okay.
And Lynn, we've got Rich Shortall as quote, a member of the public with his hand raised. but
Right,
it's
I was
more-
just gonna open it up to the public for,
And I recommend treating him more like a staff member with technical expertise because of his involvement with Fire Safe Marin rather than a member of the public.
okay. Rich, you're
Oh,
on?
great, thanks. By on? Yes,
Yes.
great, thanks, appreciate it. First, one question and then one comment. I understood that the metric project was not solely to look at public education, but sort of more generally the MWPA projects in total. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's not just public education, but it's also the attitudes and knowledge that we are getting through our public interaction, whether it's something like the community meeting that we had with the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break, also with the attitudes and knowledge that we are experiencing with our DSpace evaluators, actually talking to the members of the public, because that's actually probably our most effective form of public education.
Great, thanks. And then the second thing, I just wanted to point out that Fire Safe Marin, and if anybody's really been following us, we're not operating in a vacuum. So we don't just wake up and say, let's do something. Probably nobody looks at metrics as much as we do. That's why our programming is constantly changing and evolving. We're trying to engage more of the public. That's kind of what we live and breathe. And so the ADAPT campaign, I didn't wake up one morning and say, let's do the ADAPT campaign. This is based on feedback from the public, from our own team. And then we work with outside consultants on this stuff also to get their opinions about this. So I just want to point out that we're not working in a vacuum, and the sort of the idea that before we undertake anything, we need a public study, I think is maybe not giving us enough credit. I'm really happy we're doing the Metro project. That's great. I think it's a value. But again, pointing out that we're not operating in a vacuum. Thanks.
Thank you, Rich.
So part of this item, oh, we do have another hand up, sorry.
Rebecca Suggs, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I have two questions. First is, in the new portal, what kind of management information are you able to pull from the portal? For example, can you push a button and say, we've got 12 projects that are going to require some kind of compliance. We've got 3 projects that are over $100,000. Are you going to have data like that you can pull reports from the information that's on the portal? And number 2 question about portal data is, will the local projects from each jurisdiction be on the portal as well, so that you can gather data about that? And then 3rd question, along the lines of what's considered a JPA-wide program? Is that any project that's more than 2 or more jurisdictions involved? For example, would something like the Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break be considered a JPA-wide project and therefore come out of core funds? Again, raising the same kind of issue that Todd just talked about. How much money is going to be in the core to cover core projects when there's a lot covering other stuff? That's it.
And I'm sorry I didn't address this when Bill brought up that question. So with the exception, and obviously I think we need to adjust this, with the exception of the PWP or the coastal compliance, our definition of a JPA-wide project is something that covers the entire JPA, not just one or two core zones. So we will make an adjustment for the compliance for the West Marin, or not West Marin, the coastal zone. So yeah, they are projects that span the entire jurisdiction. When it comes to chipper days, we track how much revenue is expended in each of the zones so that we can then be able to show that we are meeting that 80% threshold for where the revenue has been spent compared to where it was generated. And then when it comes to public education, then we apportion the value based on the percentages for each zone.
Yeah.
And to answer a couple of your other questions, yes, we'll be able to determine which projects require environmental compliance, but that's a manual process. That's me working with the consultants, going through every project, trying to determine what types of potential impacts and things would take place based on location and activities. So we will be able to generate reports out of the portal regarding budget and maintenance. We'll be tracking maintenance for projects throughout the life of the project. And then let's see, local projects are also included in the web portal as well. So core, DSpace, and local, all three of those buckets are captured in the web portal. Lynn, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. Did we have any other questions or comments from the public?
Is there anyone else in the public that would like to speak on any of these items? Please raise your hand. I see none at this time. Thank you.
And we do have more content associated with this item.
Right, I know. So looks like we're going to be going over the individual work plans. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, I've invited everyone from each of the zones to discuss their projects. And so I know we have at least a few people who should be ready to at least give an overview of what projects are proposed within these zones. And so I wanted to, let's see, does anybody want to volunteer to go first? I can share my screen and bring up the work plan. So I think I'll go ahead and do that. And before anyone comments, I did see that Muir Beach needs to be in the southern Marin zone rather than the west Marin zone. So that was a categorizing mistake, but that's been fixed. So if anyone would like to volunteer to go first, otherwise I'll start asking folks.
I'm happy to go first. And
Thanks, Todd.
Todd. It's to make it easy since that's the one that's at the top of the page. So speaking for the central zone, we coordinated within the zone to ensure that we submitted for the most part identically worded projects, especially for the local projects, but we'll be committing the entirety of the 20% defensible space budget to our shared DSpace and inspection and evaluation program for each of the central zone jurisdictions. I just lost the list there. So
would it be more useful, Todd? Would it be more
I
useful?
just need just the list that you had up there a second ago in the spreadsheet.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I've committed all of these to memory. So the DSpace inspection evaluation program is the what we're calling the Greater Ross Valley and West Marin Defensible Space Inspection Program. We're all committed to that. I will speak now that we have also committed to contributing some additional share, not clear how much that'll be or whether it will be anything at this point, from the core, the central zone core, to supplement that program. We feel that this is our flagship program. It's the most effective program we're running, and the one that's probably almost certainly is going to reduce risk to the greatest degree in the entirety of the central zone. So our goal is to expand this, continue to expand this program, grow it, and increase its effectiveness by contributing not just the 20% that's allocated by MWPA, but an additional sum from the core to provide an even more robust program. That's as you move down the line, you'll see the Greater Ross Valley Home Hardening Evaluation supplemental funding. The Corte Madera, Larkspur, and Kentfield are committed to continuing the Defensible Space Voluntary Abatement Program. This is real similar to some of the additional funding that's been proposed as part of the JPA-wide project. We had fantastic effectiveness last year by identifying at-need and at-risk properties through our Defensible Space program, and simply approaching those properties that I had some certainty we're not going to correct the issues that we found, and offering a one-time voluntary abatement of the hazard at no cost to the homeowner. This was an extremely low overhead program, didn't require any dedicated staff to manage it. Was run really efficiently, had the admin costs were really essentially zero. All of the funding went directly into work on the ground, and abated dozens, nearly 100 properties overall that would not have been abated otherwise. The local D-Space grants, I'll speak, I know Rob is here, but I'll speak to that. The local D-Space grant programs are additional funding for grants very similar to the voluntary abatement program that I just described to you, except they do have an application process to access those funds for Fairfax and Sleepy Hollow. Each of the jurisdictions submitted an invasive vegetation treatment program. We were very careful to use identical wording to last year to ensure that the compliance that was already completed, with the intent of it being an ongoing program last year, will continue to be effective, the NOE that was submitted last year. So we intend to continue that program. That's primarily manual broom pulling and treatment of invasive fire hazardous plants throughout all of our jurisdictions. In addition to that, we've proposed continuing or providing some additional funding to roadside vegetation and evacuation route vegetation management. That'll be at a significantly lower number than what we committed last year, although it's the same program extended, and we really are intending to move into more of a maintenance mode of areas that have already been treated. For the Central Marin Fire Department and the local funding, the only new project we've proposed is to assist the Palm Hill neighborhood with evacuation route parking boxes, to assist in opening up evacuation routes and reducing the amount of cars that are parked in that neighborhood, specific issue that we've identified. And I think probably the most unique project this year, this is a core project, is the Ridgewood shaded fuel break planning. This is the central zone share. San Rafael zone has submitted an identical project to this. We intend to begin the planning process for a significant vegetation management project on the Ridgewood and area of Ridgewood Fire Road area between San Anselmo and San Rafael. It's an area with significant fire history, loss of structures and loss of life in prior fires, and an area that we have prioritized. So the intent is that this would be a one-year planning project, and that in future budget years, we would fund the implementation. Last but not least, the Greater Ross Valley shaded fuel break. We've at least somewhat committed publicly that our intent was to commit up to $1 million to the implementation of this program this year. Again, this is where my hair is raised when we talk about the big budget. We've already essentially committed to allocating more than our total core share if that budget were to go through to just to this project alone, which would mean that we wouldn't have funding for all these other projects. This is a long-term expensive project to implement. We have submitted an application for a grant to CAL FIRE, and now I fear we didn't ask for enough. This will be the most significant undertaking in the Central Zone's history, 38-mile fuel break, and we anticipate needing probably close to $6 million to complete this in total over the next 3 years. That's it for the Central Zone.
Thanks so much, Todd. Really appreciate it. How about West Marin? Who would like to speak for West Marin? Would that be Jordan, or would anybody else like to take that?
And Jordan's not available at the exact moment, but he should be back in the office in a few minutes.
Okay. Oh, Jordan, did you raise your hand? I think.
I just moved Jordan over as a panelist.
Thank you.
Yeah,
You beat me to it.
sorry, I'd lost some connectivity and I was not a panelist there, so I was not able to unmute myself. And so, yeah, apologies for that. I think, it's pretty consistent with kind of just building off of last year's program of work. Sorry, and I'm multitasking here as usual. Is there anything in particular that, other than us kind of continuing our focus on evacuation routes, with our limited budgets, especially on the core, right? Is kind of, we're going to try, hopefully focus on continued evacuation routes, in those areas that we can do work in the Cossio and sections around Point Reyes and in the San Geronimo Valley, and especially out in the CSAs, take advantage of this opportunity while the coast is being delayed a little bit into the future. And then, one of the other ones we had on there, I think just as far as note, was I'm just looking through these now. Oh, those are bullies. So we're just talking about just, do you want me to talk about the just the core stuff? Because I'm not gonna, we've been discussing as a group, Bolinas and others.
We're reviewing really all of it. So any of the local D-space or.
Yeah, I think, to tag on to Todd is, the importance of our D-space program in our communities out here, especially our rural communities with, so many challenges just on vegetation and location of homes. So that continued additional core support for the D-space program is really a priority for us. And then the Woodacre Ridge is a new project. It's a private land base. There's some large property owners. There's like 6 or 7 property owners that are immediately adjacent to the White Hill Fire Road that extend down to the community. And that's going to tie in with our project that we're doing with our CAL FIRE grant up on the Camp Tam Rancho as well. So that's just going to be kind of a shaded fuel break, but extending off of the existing fire road where it's on private property, and then also behind the homes and along Laurel and some other private roads that are not county maintained roads. And then one of the ones we had in there as well was the equipment purchase. And I think that's something that we're just trying to find ways to take advantage of the moment that lead us to be successful in the future. And the county fire program is getting ready to expand our crew program, most likely into the future as early as next year. We could have upwards of 4 fire crews working for Marin County. And right now we don't have any of the equipment to support them for doing vegetation management work. When we work with open space, we use their chippers. When we work with National Park Service, we use their chippers. So we're looking to start providing and getting some of the right equipment in the hands of our crews. So in the future, we can work on, in essence, non-funded projects. So we have a workforce that can just go out and do, quality work and targeted work with the right equipment. So that's kind of, there was one in there for some chipper and chip truck. Probably will just be a chipper because I don't think we'll need a chip truck in the end. And then the Rancho Santa Margarita, that's just, again, focusing on the cost of the community out there along Lucas Valley Road. That is, pretty critical location based on fire spread across the county, kind of from the east to the west and heavily vegetated and a really active community who wants to get work done. So we have a pretty short list, and part of that, I think it'll probably shorten here. And I think just speaking for West Marin, once we kind of know our final budget numbers for the zone based on the core reductions, we'll probably, instead of reducing each project by a certain amount, we'll probably relook at it and just pick some priority projects instead of, and so there'll probably be less projects. We'd rather have less projects that have, in essence, a full funding than numerous projects that have partial funding. So that's kind of what I got. And then Ballina, Stinson, Inverness, we're just working with them, and we're working with state parks and National Park Service to find some other mechanisms as well for some funding sources that we can do some work on state and federal lands through other grant funds and other processes. So.
Thanks so much, Jordan.
Yep.
And really appreciate the, heads up on what types of projects you'd like to pursue so that we can start the permitting now so that you can implement as soon as possible. Very long process. I'm wondering if Nevada would like to speak. I know Mike Swayze's on the phone. Lynn, you're welcome to speak to this as well.
Thanks. I think Mike is going to speak on this. Mike, are you there? Mike?
We can always circle back to him. I know he was on.
Still see him there.
Okay,
There we go.
There you go.
I'm on.
Hi, Mike. Thank you.
My mute button was frozen for a moment. Okay, so I'll run through these. We spend our entire DSpace budget on our 6 wildfire mitigation specialists. They're NFPA certified, and they are the leading edge for our fire prevention program in Novato. They're the biggest contact with the public in our Firewise communities. They're running our chipper programs. They are administering all our grant work. Next item is our home hardening grant program, which is we do in Novato up to $5,000 for improvements to structures for home hardening, and that's a 50-50 match. What's missing from the list is our vegetation management, our DSpace grant program. So that's another element, but there's a, I don't know how that didn't show up, but anyway, that's on our list. In addition, this year we have a new program, kind of follows some of the other zones, voluntary hazard abatement / invasive vegetation management program. And that's really looking at, in Nevada, there's a fair amount of abandoned parcels and even abandoned homes, or we have folks that have significant hazardous conditions where they're not able to address the problem, so we can do direct work with them. Going on to our core projects, we have a new position, Senior Vegetation Management Specialist, going to assist me in managing all of our on-the-ground fuel break work. Next item is funding for my position, which is providing overall management of our vegetation management work in open space lands. We love Todd's project so much that we've pretty much mirrored the process. So we're launching a Greater Novato fuel break planning process that we hope to begin this summer, and even more hopeful that we can get compliance done in time to begin doing some work late fall, early winter. Black Point is it's really Black Point, Bahia, Greenpoint evacuation routes. We've nearly completed that this year as a continuation of last year's project, but we have a little bit more to do there. Marin Valley, St. Vincent Prescribe Burn Project. This is actually a project that spans Novato and San Rafael. It's the ridge between Marin Valley and St. Vincent's property, looking at doing a prescribed burn in the woodlands there. The rest of Novato's evacuation routes are covered under Novato evacuation route. A lot more work yet to do there. We are looking at inventorying and addressing access and fuel issues along fire roads. County Parks has significant fire roads, but also we have ranch lands with roads that we want to take a look at and improve for fire prevention work. Valley Memorial Park, we have a 2-acre eucalyptus stand that we'd like to convert to a native oak woodland riparian forest right next to a developed community. So that's a project I think will have some great benefit. Marin Highlands fuel break maintenance, that's a repeat of a past project. Ignacio Valley, not San Ignacio, that's probably my bad there. Another maintenance project, Bahia maintenance project, Marin Valley goat grazing. So these are all past projects where we're doing follow-up where the previous compliance would apply. We want to do a demonstration garden at Station 63, which is, you know, in a suburban neighborhood with a yard like all of the other houses surrounding it. So we're looking at kind of threading the needle with, you know, a fire smart garden, but also one that provides habitat value and is low water use. We have our own local push, really kind of Novato focused multimedia campaign to push all the programs that we offer at Novato Fire. And finally, we're looking at doing a plan for developing a system, a Novato-wide warning system using LRAD. So there you go. That's all
Thanks,
I have.
Mike. Thank you. Quinn, are you available to speak for Santa Fe?
Yep.
Great, thanks.
So I think some stuff folks are familiar with. The D-Space program is almost entirely staff, and then, you know, logistical support, technology, cars, things like that. Management staff is our veg management team. So most of the folks that manage all of our core and local projects. Mitigation. Oh, sorry, management staff is different than that. Management staff is kind of compensating. That's exactly what it sounds like. Mitigation and preparedness staff, supporting our firewise communities, alerts, all that good stuff. Police rangers, so we're continuing that project. And that's what we use to patrol the open space to reduce ignitions and remove illegal encampments and ignition sources. We put some money into our local budget for landscape restoration work. So, you know, some of the areas where we've entirely removed juniper and left it totally barren, there's erosion concerns as well as pollinator plants, habitat concerns. So we want to look at restoring some of those ecosystems and then using that in that educational way that we've talked about before in terms of signage and like nature signy information, if you will. The small responsive project budget is kind of our contingency budget. So if we're getting complaints or, you know, a report of a dead tree in open space near property or things like that, we just want to have a little bucket to be available to respond with. We do have a CAL FIRE, actually it's a CAL OES grant that we were awarded for a project in Crystal Park, and then it touches a little bit in Terra Linda as well. So there's a match there. So that's part of our local budget. And then Marin Woods got some fuel reduction work for their local budget as well. And then we also have our vegetation and project management staff, which is our veg management staff, doing our core and some of our local space. So Kate, Calvin, those kind of folks. Direct assistance we want to continue with, most likely using the Foundry crew. Educational landscaping, so that's some of the building off that restoration work, but some of that will also potentially be more demo-y gardens. Outreach and engagement, so just making sure we've got materials and we're looking at like a yard sign campaign and various things that we just need to continue to engage in with outreach. Ridgewood or Todd already mentioned, so that's kind of a combined project there. Ukes is the big focus in that area. Open space on some of these are, San Rafael has a lot of like 2 to 10 acre parcels, and so we've used that budget to address those around defensible space areas. Evacuation route clearance, so we're kind of entering our, I guess, third phase of that project. So it'll be a smaller budget this year, mainly focused on maintenance, and then any kind of smaller areas we missed. We think we will have gotten all the big zones areas done this year, but we know there's going to be some little pockets that we need to address. Grazing, so a slightly expanded contract, and especially in some of the areas we've treated. So already kind of moving into maintenance on some of these areas and using goats to do that, as well as broom eradication where we can. The China Camp LRAD we think is a really important project because of the campgrounds in China Camp and their lack of cell phone reception, and from an ignition standpoint, as well as kind of where they sit from a risk standpoint. And we've got a lot of visitors there. So at this point, the city's not looking at our full city LRAD system, but we're looking at strategic locations. So we've got state parks support on that, and we're looking at that. Debris disposal. So this is especially for like volunteer broom pool days, being able to provide broom pool, like debris boxes, as well as our additional chipper days, which support our direct assistance program, or some of the areas that aren't covered by the JPA-wide chipper, or someone doesn't work with the schedule, or whatever the case may be. The West San Pablo is what we formerly were referring to as Portezuelo Hill. So that's that area right off of 101. That's another eucalyptus project. We own some of that land, and then Caltrans owns a lot of it. So we're going to do our work, and then we're hoping within the next year Caltrans is going to come, and we're coordinating with them to finish up their side of that project. And then continuing the fire road work. So whether that's mulching, heavier debris, heavier fuel removal is needed to make sure the engines can get through, and hopefully looking at some better erosion control methods, because every year we end up with lots of ditches, and trying to prevent that to make sure that our roads are accessible all year round. So that's the next phase of that project. And what I would say to kind of Todd's earlier point about, I think he called it a death nail. I'd say this project list hits about the 2 million mark based on our estimates. So just from a perspective, if we're looking at cutting that by a third, just for context on that. And that's just the core budget hits the 2 million. Local and D-space are within our allocations. So that's all I got, unless anybody has questions.
Thank you, Quinn. Let's go ahead and invite Jesse Fagoni. If you're still on the call, Jesse, it'd be great to have you cover what Southern Marin and Mill Valley and Muir Beach would be doing. Are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Awesome, thank you so much. Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you, Ann. So Southern Marin and Mill Valley, we want to go with a district-wide approach to mitigate risk throughout the community. So we have a lot of good projects and programs regarding public education, notification, vegetation management, and additional staffing to handle these types of projects and programs. So start of the list, D-space inspectors. We do have a lot of vulnerable areas in our district that, we need to make sure compliance is done for these homes. So that's why we have D-space inspectors, vegetation management project coordinator. As everyone kind of knows, that there's a lot that goes into these projects from start to finish. So we want to make sure we have the correct personnel to see these projects through. And then hazardous tree removal for both Southern Marin and Mill Valley. We've targeted specific areas along evac routes and more or less hazardous tree areas, including eucalyptus groves greater than ½ an acre that are surrounding neighborhoods. And so additionally, evacuation maps, that's big on public education. We want to provide as much information as we can to residents regarding what to do during evacuation. So we felt that was in need for our district. Additionally, some of the large scale fuel breaks that we've proposed is the Summit and Ralston fuel break for Mill Valley. This is a very high risk area, very high in severity zone that we want to do 100 feet defensible space fuel break from the structures. And that just includes, removing hazardous vegetation, removing the invasives, limbing up trees, and maybe targeted, dead or dying trees up in that area. Same thing with Ring Mountain. We have a lot of light flashy fuels, a lot of grasses, brush, some small youth groves that we are looking at treating. And we've been working with Marin County Parks and determining the best treatment methods and best land management practices up in that area. Let's see what else we got on the list. Muir Beach, that project is a Muir Beach project. I believe they're just more or less continuing to do work on the Highway 1 evacuation corridor regarding proper clearance along evacuation routes, I believe. And I think Jordan touched bases on that earlier in the meeting too. So, and that's kind of the rundown of our projects and programs. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Jesse.
Thank you.
And I won't go into the JPA-wide projects here because we already went through that list with Mark. So I think from there, we do have a hand raised in the attendees. And the only other topics I think as part of this item to discuss was a couple of points that I'll just make very, very briefly. And then I think we can open it up. One was, once this work plan is finalized, what's the process after that? And, this point is really in response to some questions that I have received from various folks. And that's really to let you know that, the projects and proposals in the work plan will be, the level of detail will be enough to kind of gauge, cost, approximate, and environmental compliance pathway, and things like that will continue for those projects that need environmental compliance and need further collaboration with land management agencies. That scoping will continue. So determining exactly what's going to happen where, that process will continue after the work plan is finalized, and that's really to get down to the on the ground level detail that you need for the environmental compliance and to really scope out your project. Some projects already have environmental compliance done, and so those will be ready to implement. And the next quick item I wanted to mention was proposal codes. We are adding codes, and the codes in the spreadsheets now are very, very drafty, just to kind of give you an idea for how we're going to be tracking these projects over time. We'd like, because project names change or get truncated, we're attaching proposal codes or project codes to each of these proposals now and for the life of the project. And that'll help us track, invoices as they come in, need for follow-up treatment in the future, things like that. And so when we get a number or a code set for a project, that'll probably stay with the project throughout its life. And so the numbers that are in the spreadsheet now will change for sure. Some of these projects are rollover from previous years, so we'll go through and adjust those. So very briefly, it's zone, agency, work plan year, which for us is 22-23. So we've added the 23 there per recommendations from finance staff, as well as the number of proposals. So 1 through say 20 for the zone, and then core local D space, so C, L, or D, and then project types. So we have some codes associated with project types. So D space evaluations is EV. So I wanted to just let you know that that's the approach. You don't have to memorize all of these, but we'll make sure to provide those to you for future invoicing and things like that. So that's it in terms of what I wanted to cover. So I will stop screen sharing, and that's that.
Okay, thanks, Anne. Jim Cheka, would you like to speak?
Great, thanks, Lynn. Thanks for the presentation, everybody. I have a question and a comment related to the draft work plan and its connection to the spreadsheet that you just shared. And I haven't been through the entire 286 pages yet, but I did go through just to look to see where some of the projects that we're expecting to see as Marin County Parks, just to see the type of information that was listed in the draft plan. And I see a couple projects that list us as a partner at the top of the page, but it looked like the output that's reflected in the draft plan is not the same format as the platform that you shared at the beginning of the meeting that has a cell where it shows, please describe what your collaboration looks like and up to 200 words. So I guess my comment is, it would be great to incorporate that at some point. I think what happened may be that there was a website edit later on after folks had already entered their project. But I want to just double check that that was the issue. And if that is the issue, if it's possible to include or encourage people to go back to provide those details in a subsequent draft, I think that would be helpful for the public and also for us. As we review these, it's nice to be able to look at the top of the submission and just be able to tick off and look through the partner list. And then, flag that, okay, great, that's us, go through. And this applies, I think, to all the partners, all the other land managers, I think would benefit from that approach. So that's one set of question and comments. And then specifically, I want to give Todd kudos. He's reached out early and often about the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break, but it looks like we're not listed as a partner in the partner listing, but we are described in the portion below. So I think there's just a few things like that that could be tweaked over time. And I want to bring those to folks' attention now.
Thanks so much, Jim. Yeah, agree 100%. The earlier we added that question regarding collaboration with partners. And in the beginning, if you didn't identify partners, that question didn't show up because there was a sequence of logic. So some folks didn't see it, but we'll definitely be adding that back in. And really this month of April, we'll be focusing on fine tuning the language, there are a lot of holes to fill still in all of these proposals. So not just in relation to land management agencies, but that especially is an important one. So thanks for bringing that up, and we'll continue to work with you on that.
That's great. Now, I figured that was implied when you talked about the refining process, but I just want to make sure that collaboration in particular was noted. Thanks, Ann.
Yeah, thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Jim. Belle, you have a question?
Yeah, as long as Jim brought this up, it's exactly the kind of thinking that I had earlier, but I just wanted to sort of focus on two questions on the form that would like to be able to follow more carefully through the web. And that's how will the project dispose of or utilize leftover biomass? And the other one, which is especially important these days, is how will the project, it's about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Those are two topics there, and I'm interested in following out how those whose projects they are going to be doing that. So thanks.
Thank you, Belle. Yeah, we'll be in touch on that. I think those will be part of the further refinements in the next month.
Good. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Belle. So moving forward, are we supposed to do a motion to move this forward up to operations to review the work plan and the budget?
We have comments from the public.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Are you ready for those now?
Yes, thank you.
Jim Casper.
Oh, there he is.
Hello, everybody. Got basically three in the category of comments and maybe suggestions. I'm not looking for a response at this time. An observation, and this is tied in a little bit with Quinn's and Todd's comments. Initially with the MWPA, the first 2 years, the idea was to get stuff done, right? And the focus, my view is the focus is starting to change more to longer term tactical, not strategic kind of activities. And perhaps what could change, and this ties in a little bit with Quinn's and Todd's comments, is that the focus should be on planning first and then do the implementation. And maybe to the point where that becomes a requirement. In other words, if you want to do something next year, do the plan this year. And that might take away some of the issues that were brought up earlier. So that's item number one. The second one, and somebody mentioned this in a different geography, but in Tam Valley in particular, based on other work I've done, there are a significant number of undeveloped parcels, paper roads, that no one has responsibility for, and I got to believe that exists throughout the county. And I don't know if there's a way to emphasize a program or that each of the areas, the 5 geographic areas, emphasize programs that tackle those kind of properties. Because in the case of Tam Valley, they're not on the perimeter, they're in the middle of developed areas, but no one owns them. I mean, to the point where it's like 5% of the TCSD geography, which is about, TCSD is about 900 acres. So that's the second item. The third item, and consider this a comment, and it's tied in a little bit about with transparency, if you will. It goes back to the question early on with that Mark did on overhead versus admin. And that was addressed primarily at the NWPA level. But if I look at the individual areas, there is a lot of personnel that's in there as well. And it may be worthwhile keeping track of that so that it doesn't become a case of funding positions as opposed to doing work. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. There's another one that would like to speak. It'd be Rebecca Suggs. Rebecca?
Yeah, thanks. I'd like to know the criteria used for the zones about which budget the project work is being projected to come out of. Sometimes it's listed as core and sometimes it's under local. What criteria are they using for which bucket the project is in? And then is that criteria the same across all the zones? And then if there's not enough of their percentage of the core budget left to cover a project, are they going to roll the project into next year? Are they going to roll it into their local budget? Or are they going to not do the project? That's it.
Thank you, Rebecca.
So there's a little bit of a variance of answers for the first question, Rebecca, and it has to do with the makeup of the zones. Novato being unique in the fact that they are the only agency really within that zone. So, and in San Rafael zone, you have 2 agencies, Marinwood and San Rafael Fire. But let's use Central Marin as an example where we have 7 member agencies that are within that. Projects that are identified through the local program would occur within only the jurisdictional boundaries of, let's say, the town of San Anselmo. So a local project that is proposed by the town of San Anselmo would only occur in the town of San Anselmo. Whereas a core project would extend across the 7 jurisdictions, or could extend across the 7 jurisdictions within that Ross Valley core. And then Novato just is in the sake of where they're both the core zone and the member agency, so that they can apply their funds more in the local area versus the core area. And like, I think, Lynn, correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like you're really using your local monies towards like D-space grants and defense stuff that's more community oriented, where it seems like the core projects are more strategic oriented. At least that's kind of how I saw how you guys divided it. But it's good. It's going to vary a little bit amongst each of the member agencies, because that is one of the strengths, and also, quite honestly, the challenges of the MWPA is that there is a tremendous amount of local control built into each of our member agencies, because they really, quite frankly, have the best read of what's appropriate for their jurisdiction. And then the second question, as far as due to the budget constraints, and if they have projects that exceed the amount that's going to be in the regional core, That's going to be a mixed bag. Some agencies may decide to table a project, put it onto the next area, or if they have room to move it over to a local project, they may try to do that. It's really going to vary from agency to agency.
Thanks.
Mark, and if I can just add, for San Rafael, for our core, we looked at the core mission of the MWPA, right? Education, evacuation routes, vegetation management. And so projects that were meeting those objectives, we generally do as core. And then for local projects are the ones that we want or need the most flexibility with, or that might be much more customized to just our either city or zone. And I'd say too, the budgeting question's a great question. And I think some of that too is contractor costs are also changing, like weekly, if not monthly and daily, it feels like. So, you know, some of these could end up being way over budget and some of them could be way under budget because just the market is so unpredictable in availability. And so we still have a couple months left on this fiscal year too. And so we're doing all we can to get those projects in, but rollovers are potential to help us get some of this work done. But inevitably, I think some of it either has to get phased differently or will get pushed. Because I think most of us have our local and D space pretty well allocated as well. So we don't really have the ability to move a core project into local unless we decide to cut a local project as an example.
Thank you, Quinn. Are there any other comments or questions from the public?
Is there anyone else wishing to speak on any of these items? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So Mark, as far as moving this up to operations.
Well, I think we've dropped below a core or a quorum. And so that brings about
Okay.
Interesting problem, but I think that we have been able to, during the quorum, elicit enough information where the concerns are.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I think we've received enough data to, when it comes to the JPA wide projects, where we can formulate a staff report for operations where adjustments could be made. Unfortunately, we just won't have the formal motion.
Okay.
But I don't think that I know that does not stop us from being able to move this project or move the work plan forward to the operations committee.
Okay.
Yeah, council actually said that we don't need a formal vote. So it's kind of optional.
Okay.
But today's meeting has been tremendously valuable and all the discussion can be shared up through the operations committee, given that it was done with a quorum.
Okay. So how many members do we have for a quorum? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
I think we're at 6.
6. So Lori, can we continue the meeting or do we have to?
So you can continue the meeting with discussion. I mean, when we did, you don't retake the roll, so we can continue with discussion and of the meeting.
Okay. So moving forward, action item B is the Ecology Sound Practices Partnership Document.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to, let's see, screen share briefly and just take a moment and review kind of where we are. And then I have the document to share as well. So as you all recall, the Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership came together at the request of those who were working on Measure C to provide input from the environmental communities in Marin and help build the MWPA and provide some recommendations. So representatives from various environmental organizations drafted a set of recommended best practices for MWPA funded projects. for vegetation management and wildlands, defensible space, and carbon management. And I think some of those ESP members, and Bill can chime in as well, really looking at some of these recommendations as guidance for, potentially other organizations as well in the county. Those representatives provided that document to NWPA staff, myself and Mark, and we looked it over with our council, with the environmental consultants, and really thought through what was allowable under Measure C and what MWPA's role is according to JPA language, and came up with some recommended edits, continued working with ESP, brought that document back to the ATC in February for an update and to get input. And then we started working with ESP representatives again to begin addressing those ATC comments received. So now we have an additional draft of the ESP document that, because we don't have a quorum, we won't take any formal action, but I'm going to bring up, I'm going to screen share again and bring up the document so I can show you where we are. So we've made, I'm going to scroll through. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on all of these edits. You have it in your agenda packet. It's available for you to take a look at, and hopefully you already have. Generally, the edits provide additional kind of assurance of flexibility around this document. This document is recommended best practices, not a legally binding document per se. So we added language such as a living, evolving, flexible set of recommended best practices. And we also added language that reminds the reader that the work that we're doing, the primary focus of the work that we're doing is wildfire risk reduction type work. And so we added a little language in the beginning here, added some introductory language around the CalVTP, because the CalVTP document, that environmental impact report that we're all at least partly familiar with at this point, addresses a lot of the same issues that the ESP representatives were concerned about. And so they wanted to express that as kind of a foundational document for some of their comments and suggestions. Now, from our perspective, not all of our projects need to comply with the same level of rigor as a CalVTP project. So we wanted to build in some of that flexibility into the language. A project in an area with a lot of existing non-native annual grasses and weeds does not kind of have the same sensitivity as a project in a remote wildland. And we wanted to recognize that. And we wanted to recognize that there is a nexus between wildfire risk reduction and control of non-native plants, and that there's already a lot of non-native plants out there in the seed bed in all of the areas that we're working. We wanted to kind of further refine some of the language about the role of the ESP document, not really dive into recommendations around budgeting, et cetera, but kind of get at the gist of some of these comments. Like this comment number 6, we took out language related to, ESP's thoughts about MWPA budgeting, but really got at the nugget of the comment, which was that they would like us to continue planning for maintenance of any of the areas where we do vegetation management. This comment just acknowledges that we're already doing a lot of environmental compliance and a lot of best practices, and we are already providing very detailed project descriptions. This comment is related to recognizing wildfire risk reduction as a primary goal of our projects. And this adds some flexibility around incorporating CalVTP type recommendations for our projects, where sometimes it's appropriate and sometimes it's more than what we need. This section with carbon management, regarding carbon management, we didn't really make too many recommendations, except to make sure that we were clear that where recommendations conflict with defensible space type recommendations, we don't want to do anything that would conflict with those recommendations. We don't want to want this document to provide recommendations that would put your home more at risk. So we added language like where appropriate and where it doesn't conflict with your defensible space inspection, etc. So we wanted to make sure also to refer residents to their local fire agencies for their recommendations and their local inspections. So follow current guidance from your local fire district or defensible space inspection report, which may include, etc. So we did that in a couple of different locations related to defensible space. So that is kind of the gist. There were some details around native and non-native plants and slope stability and whether or not to replace plants. And that's really the gist of the comments there. So, so overall, we wanted to add a little more flexibility, make sure to refer residents to their local agencies and their defensible space reports, make sure, it's very clear that this isn't intended to conflict with those recommendations, and add a little more kind of understanding of flexibility for that's just needed as a government agency trying to implement projects. And with that, I'll just ask Belle if there's anything that I missed that you'd like to add, and then that's it for me.
Yeah, I could add a lot, but I think in going back and consulting again with our environmental community, we worked it out so that we feel that the guidelines are intact, that they apply across the three major areas we were most interested in illuminating, which is defensible space and veg management and carbon. And so it's okay from our point of view to move ahead with this document as amended. So I think that there is a demand out there among different groups and agencies is where are these, and we'd like to use them. And so I've just mentioned that as a way of saying that I hope we can proceed with some deliberation to move it along. But we want to thank everybody from this committee that participated and thought hard about this, because that makes a difference in terms of how we can say this is all our result. Thank you.
Thanks, Belle.
Thanks, Belle. Let's see, should we open this up to public comments?
At this time, is anybody wishing to speak on this item? Please raise your hand in the public. I see no hands raised. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I see
do have
a hand
we
raised.
do have a hand raised.
Okay.
It is Bill Carney, and let me allow him to talk. Bill, are you there?
Yes, good afternoon. Yeah, I just wanted to endorse what Belle was saying. This has been a couple of years effort and really has brought a lot of community voices in support of the work of MWPA. So appreciate, everybody's involvement in this, and look forward to it moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. Are there any other public comments out there that you see?
Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this item? I see none. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving forward. Number 9, committee members' requests regarding future agenda items. Did we want to add the open space?
Yes.
Okay.
One item we would like to add is an opportunity for Jim Chaka to talk more about how best to collaborate with Marin County Parks and open space, and share with us what their internal process is looking like. And that is recent information. I know that their commission met recently and they have some guidance on that. So I think that's something that he can present on, and that'll help inform, next year's process for us.
Anybody else?
Not an agenda item, just a process question. We cannot vote on the ESP document because we don't have quorum, right? Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Thank you.
Okay. Moving forward, motion to adjourn, but we can't have a motion to adjourn because we don't have a.
You don't need a motion to adjourn. That's just a formality.
Okay.
You can adjourn the meeting, Lynn.
Okay. I will be adjourning this meeting. Thank you so much for everybody and everyone's hard work. This is quite amazing. We're on year 3, and it's just been really neat to see the amount of involvement and passion and energy that's gone into the MWPA and all of us working together from all the different groups. So thank you, everybody, for your hard work.
And if I may offer a closing comment, Lynn, we are, thanks to all of your guys' hard work, we're 5 weeks ahead of where we were last year in this process. We have 3 additional projects. We had 111 projects last year. We have 114. And due to the good refinements of the work portal, I know there were some stumbles and there was some awkwardness to it, but I do think I hope it was better than what you guys went through last year. And we're learning still to make it even better next year. And so far, the document's only 224 pages compared to 1,051. So we are improving.
Definitely.
There's a win.
Yeah.
It'll get longer as we continue adding detail, but yeah, I'll take it.
I don't think it's going to
The
multiply by
spreadsheet's
5.
The spreadsheet's always so helpful. So,
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
I see a question.
Jim Casper just saying,
Jim
great job to
Casper.
all MP for the MWPA meeting.
Okay, great.
I guess, sorry, on the next meeting agenda, I guess, can we specifically bring the ESP document back next meeting?
Yeah, we will.
That wasn't inherently, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, everybody, have a wonderful day, have a wonderful week, and go eat some lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.